Sometimes art imitates life, and sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And so it can be hard to tell whether or not the plot of a popular movie was inspired by a true story or whether it's just a movie. And sometimes the line is blurred, and there are elements of truth in a film that are so hard to believe that the audience never even considers the facts behind the fiction. Nicolas Cage plays an arms dealer in Lord of War, which came out back in 2005, where he sold illegal guns and ammunition to various dictators around the world without an ounce of remorse. After narrowly escaping a dedicated Interpol agent played by Ethan Hawke, who was hot on his trail, Cage's luck eventually runs out after his wife discovers just what working in the shipping business actually meant. Once he's captured, and Ethan Hawke's character is celebrating his victory by lecturing Cage how he'll spend the rest of his life in prison, he doesn't appear to be worried despite the mountain of evidence against him. In an epic twist, Cage responds by telling him that he's going to brace him for what's about to happen. That way he can prepare himself, saying that soon there's going to be a knock on the door and that you're going to be called outside. And in the hall, there's going to be a man who outranks you. First, he'll compliment you on the fine job you've done, that you've made the world a safer place, and that you'll receive a commendation and a promotion. And then he's going to tell you that I am to be released. You're going to protest. You'll probably threaten to resign. But in the end, I will be released. The expression on Hawke's face slowly changes from joy to despair as Cage continues, saying the reason that he'll be released is the same reason that Hawke thinks he'll be convicted, because he does rub shoulders with some of the most vile men calling themselves leaders today, but he says some of these men are the enemies of your enemies. And while the biggest arms dealer in the world is your boss, the President of the United States, who ships more merchandise in a day than I do in a year, sometimes it's embarrassing to have his fingerprints on the guns. Sometimes he needs a freelancer like me to supply forces he can't be seen supplying.
You call me evil. But unfortunately for you, I'm a necessary evil.
Cage's character is then set free, clearly having immunity for being a U.S. government asset. Lord of War was based on actual events and was endorsed by the human rights organization Amnesty International for raising awareness about the horrors of arms trafficking. Cage's speech about working for the President of the United States was reflective of actual covert arms deals done by agents of the United States government to avoid a direct connection between the weapons and America. Like his character said, the U.S. government doesn't want their fingerprints on the weapons. One of the most famous instances of this is the Iran-Contra affair, which involved the CIA covertly shipping weapons to Iran in the 1980s, violating an arms embargo and creating one of the biggest political scandals in America. At the time, the CIA was covertly supporting Contra rebels in Nicaragua who were using terrorist tactics to fight against the Nicaraguan government. Aside from being an intelligence agency, the CIA operates in part as a terrorist organization that enjoys the immunity and protection given by the United States government so they can act as America's foreign policy puppet masters and use any means necessary to achieve their goals. The inspiration for Lord of War was largely based on Victor Bout, the Russian arms dealer who was exchanged in a prisoner swap for WNBA player Brittany Griner after she was arrested in Russia for having a THC vape pen, which she brought when she was playing basketball over there. On a side note, Joe Biden left a U.S. Marine in Russia, Paul Whelan, who was arrested in 2018 accused of being a spy, who may or may not be, but the media and the Biden administration forgot all about him. But thank God we got that D-list celebrity, the lesbian or intersex WNBA basketball star, free, while Paul Whelan is still stuck there serving a 16-year prison sentence. But anyway, the movie imitates life so much because, like Nicolas Cage, Victor Bout, the Merchant of Death, also ran guns for the United States during the Iraq War. Seriously, this isn't even disputed. His front companies were paid $60 million by the U.S. government to fly supplies into Iraq to support the U.S. war effort. They sure don't make films like that anymore, but there are some good books out there like mine, which you should order in paperback from Amazon. Another film inspired by true events is Tom Cruise's American Made, where he played Barry Seal, a cocaine smuggler who worked for the CIA, but The film left out some key details about SEAL's activities with the infamous Mena, Arkansas smuggling ring. The wholesale importation of cocaine into the United States during the Iran-Contra affair is well documented and admitted, but few people know that these operations led to the murders of teenagers Don Henry and Kevin Ives in August of 1987 after they came across the drop zone in Mena, Arkansas, and were spotted by the perpetrators. The medical examiner, a member of the Clinton crime family named Fahmy Malik, claimed that the kids smoked too much pot and fell asleep on the train tracks and just happened to be covered up by a tarp and didn't wake up from the train blowing its horn or the vibration on the tracks. There's an old documentary titled Obstruction of Justice, The Mena Connection, that clearly lays out the facts surrounding the case and how then Governor Bill Clinton was basically the mafia don in that region, and along with Vice President George H.W. Bush, George Bush Sr., who was formerly the director of the CIA, the cocaine importing agency, were intimately involved in the trafficking of weapons and cocaine. George Bush Sr. was a member of Skull and Bones, by the way, along with his father, Prescott Bush, and his son, George W. Bush, which is basically an entry point into the Illuminati Mafia. And George Bush Sr. claimed that he never worked for the CIA at all until he was appointed the director of the agency by Gerald Ford in 1976, but that was a lie, and he worked for the CIA in some capacity since the late 1950s and was involved in the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba in 1961, which was admittedly orchestrated, of course, by the CIA. Mike Rupert is a former LAPD narcotics detective who helped discover that the CIA was trafficking drugs in the 1970s, and Gary Webb, who worked for the San Jose Mercury News at the time, is also someone who played a key role in uncovering the CIA's involvement in importing cocaine. The 2014 film Kill the Messenger, starring Jeremy Renner, who portrays Webb, is based on Webb's book, Dark Alliance, and is actually a pretty accurate depiction of Gary Webb's investigation and a mysterious death. It's interesting to note that the CIA was birthed out of the Skull and Bones secret society at Yale University. Yale history professor Gaddis Smith once said that Yale has influenced the Central Intelligence Agency more than any other university, giving the CIA the atmosphere of a class reunion. And Yale slang for a member of a secret society is a spook, the same term used in the CIA for an undercover operative. And speaking of covert CIA operations, Operation Timber Sycamore, which was uncovered in 2016, was a CIA-run gun trafficking program which armed the rebels in Syria in 2012 to help them fight against the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad. Not to mention the CIA funded the Mujahideen back in the 1980s to fight against the Russians in Afghanistan, and those are the same fighters who later morphed into Al-Qaeda because the law of unintended consequences is impossible to avoid. And more recently, the U.S. has been funding and arming Nazis in Ukraine, the Azov Battalion, who every mainstream media publication in America and the ADL called literal Nazis for years, up until Russia invaded Ukraine, and since they're hardcore Ukrainian nationalists on the front lines fighting against Russia, now we're just supposed to ignore what the liberal media had been saying about them for years. If you like my more serious monologues like this, then you'll love reading my books. So order The True Story of Fake News, How Mainstream Media Manipulates Millions, in paperback from Amazon.com, or download the ebook from Kindle, iBooks, Nook, or Google Play. My books are a lot more in-depth and hardcore than my videos, which I have to tone down a bit for obvious reasons. So head on over to Amazon.com or click the link in the description below and check them out.